On a summer night in Alma, Arkansas, 1995, a little girl named Morgan Nick disappeared from a baseball field, and a community lost its sense of safety forever. The town sits snug against the shoulder of the Ozarks, the kind of place where porches sag from years of family gatherings and the names of neighbors are traded like blessings. On warm evenings, the air tastes faintly of cut grass and gasoline and something sweeter, like fried dough cooling on a paper plate. Children run until the sun folds behind the trees and parents call them home when the porch light goes on. Friday nights belong to the ballpark. The scoreboard is a small box of electricity under the stars. The bleachers a theater for ordinary life. That night, the bleachers were full. Men in baseball caps leaned forward, hands braced on knees, watching the Little League team move like a practiced machine. Women rocked in lawn chairs with paper cups on their knees, trading the small talk that stitches a town together. Teenagers wandered the edge of the field, half interested in the game, half in the freedom of being outside after a week of school. Laughter threaded through it all, a steady soundtrack that said nothing dangerous would happen here. Nobody expected tragedy to be so quiet. Morgan was 6 years old. She had freckles that freckled in a pattern like someone had taken a speckled brush to her nose. Her hair was braided into pigtails that bobbed when she ran. She liked stones with little veins of quartz and the kind of songs on the radio that made kids hum all afternoon. She loved butterflies and the hold of her mother's hand and the small, plain dignity of being a child who belongs. She loved baseball enough to sit in the grass and watch her brother play. She loved the way the ball seemed to fly forever when it left the bat, as if the world would pause to admire that arc. On the field, everything was ordinary in the way that invites trust. The concession stand glowed under fluorescent bulbs. A man sold hot dogs and called the prices with a voice that knew every regular. A woman 2 rows back knitted while she kept one eye on the game. Children traded cards, popped bubble gum, and chased each other in wide loops around the outfield. You could feel the economy of attention. People were watching what belonged to them, and nobody was watching what didn't. Morgan got sand in her shoes. It was nothing, the sort of tiny annoyance that lives in childhood, granules that snag at the toes and make a person stomp and shrug and go about the night. She went behind the bleachers to empty them. It was a short walk, one that might take 20 or 30 seconds. She told her mother she would be right back. Her mother nodded because that is what mothers do. They believe their child's words until force or fact tells them otherwise. In small towns, strangers come and go like wind through the pines. A pickup truck idled near the back of the field, its engine a soft, low hum against the night. People glanced at it, considered it, and returned their gaze to the game. Nobody registered the truck as suspicious. Nobody annotated the moment in their memory as one that might be replayed forever. When Morgan did not return, the pattern of ordinary life folded into something acute and terrible. A friend called her name and thought she was playing. A coach assumed she was with a parent. A man by the concession stand assumed she had gone to the restroom. Those assumptions stacked and concealed the absence. Time obeyed the assumptions, and for a few breaths, the absence remained an unnoticed shape. Then someone noticed. The name became a question. Mothers craned their necks for fewer reasons than this. People moved through the bleachers, their voices catching on the syllables of a child's name. The laughter thinned. The lights on the scoreboard flickered like a heartbeat under stress. What had been a chorus of ordinary sounds began to break and scatter. A rustle of people standing, the clack of a radio, a shout cut short by disbelief. A mother with a voice that trembled said, "Morgan," and the single name carried through the field like a bell. What happened next is measured in small, frantic acts. Adults running, flashlights sweeping the pine line, hands checking cars and coolers in the dark seams of the park. The truck that had been idling behind the bleachers drove away. Witnesses who had only seen the edge of it now tried to reconstruct angles, to fill in blanks. Memory, under pressure, is an unreliable instrument. It rounds and softens corners, turns color to suggestion. Details, make, model, a partial plate, slipped through people's fingers like fine grain. Police arrived with sirens and questions. The town reorganized itself into search patterns, neighbors with flashlights, canine teams working in the underbrush, volunteers calling out to each other across the dark. A helicopter would later move like a slow-watched god over the field, its light carving white ribbons in the trees. But in those first moments, it was people on foot, shouting names until their throats were raw. The smell of spilled soda and the tang of urgency braided together in the humid air. A mother's face is a theater of grief before grief articulates itself. Colleen Nick answered questions with the hard, precise edges of someone who refuses to be unmoored. She recited details, what Morgan was wearing, where she had been sitting, what she had eaten. She held photographs of a face that would not close, would not sleep, would not grow in front of her. Every question the officers asked was an attempt to turn the night into a series of fact-based threads that could be reassembled. For the family, the questions were nails pounded without rest. As word spread, the field emptied of ordinary spectators and filled with something else, people driven by purpose, not leisure. Unknown volunteers arrived and joined searches, hands finding gloves and directions with a single-mindedness born of collective fear. The town that had prided itself on ease now ran on a fierce, raw energy, the kind that will err to action for the sake of not knowing. Flyers were printed on copiers and taped to telephone poles. A ring of plastic and blue tape circled the infield as if to cordon off the ordinary world. The night stretched thin into an early morning of questions. Reporters with still cameras came from stations 2 counties over. A case that had been a private collapse now took on a public life. The image of a 6-year-old with pigtails and a missing laugh filled television screens and newspaper fronts. Familiar neighbors became faces on nightly news, holding up the same photograph and saying the same thing. Have you seen her? But publicity can help and it can harm. It mobilizes resources and it breeds rumor. The town felt both of those effects at once. More eyes scanning the highways, more false leads that spent the family's energy on hope that burned too quickly. In the furnace of public urgency, the original facts risked getting brittle. Even so, the first search left patterns, footprints, the tire ruts of a departing truck, witness statements that fit together in a mosaic no one could finish. Investigators built a timeline out of fragments. They worked with the stubborn determination of people practiced in impossible work, bending new techniques and old instincts toward the one true aim of every investigation: find the child, bring her home. A small town learns to live with folded grief in the same ways it learns to live with other injustices, by remembering and by acting. That first night became the hinge of an ordinary life that would never swing back the same way. It was the moment when a field became an altar for a question with no answer yet. What happens when a child walks away for 30 seconds and does not return? There are ordinary reasons children become separated. Games, restrooms, chasing a ball. There are less ordinary reasons. And those are the ones people dare not name until the evidence forces the word into daylight. In Alma, the non-naming did not last. The sense that a child could be taken ceremoniously and invisibly in front of dozens of people forced the town into a new grammar of caution. And in the center of this new grammar stood a mother holding an absence. She held a picture of Morgan and a certainty that did not belong to anyone who had not been there. That the missing girl had someone who loved her beyond the reach of news cycles and investigative charts. That certainty is a strange thing. It is both anchor and flint. It keeps a person rooted and it sparks relentless action. The next hours would turn into days. The nights that followed would wrinkle into years. Those first moments, the sand in the shoes, the short walk behind the bleachers, the glance away, would be told and retold, each retelling a kind of devotion. In the telling, Morgan's small body of facts became a larger thing, a beacon that would not go dark, a name that would be spoken in classrooms and on radio, a rallying cry for people who learn to find strength in the work of not forgetting. Morgan's absence did not simply subtract the life from Alma. It remade the town's contours, shifting where people placed their trust, how they watched their children, and how they imagined the world. In that soft, ordinary summer night, something irreversible happened. A little girl walked out of sight, and the quiet that followed rearranged every porch light, every evening plan, every parent's practice. The field remained, the scoreboard still lit, but the music that had filled the place had been altered forever. Alma sits against the low rise of the Ozarks, like a memory that won't leave. Streets are shaded by maples and oaks, houses with porches and wind chimes. A high school whose football lights cut a square of gold into the summer night. In the early 90s, the town moved slow enough for people to know one another's history by first names. Church potlucks on Sundays, hardware stores with cash registers that still ding, and Little League seasons that feel as certain as the weather. It is a place where children grow up with a kind of casual freedom, where keys are left on kitchen counters and doors are seldom locked. Morgan was born at the end of August 1988, and from her first days, she carried an easy brightness. She was curious in the small, perfect ways of children, asking what a cloud was made of, collecting stones with tiny veins of quartz, greeting dogs as if they were long-lost cousins. Her laugh had a particular cadence that made people around her smile involuntarily. She loved the tang of popsicles in July, and sitting on the tailgate of a truck watching the sun go down. She loved being outside, where the world felt open and safe. Her mother, Colleen, held both fierce protectiveness and a willingness to let her children become. She watched from porches and bleachers and doorways with eyes that held worry and pride in equal measure. The family moved through the rhythms of small-town life. Church on Sunday, baseball through the week, family dinners that smelled of casserole and coffee. Brothers and sisters learned to share toys and secrets. Neighbors learned to pass casseroles and take in mail when someone was sick. There are ordinary rituals here that hold people together like stitches in fabric. To live in a place like Alma is to trust routine. Parents assume a circle of community vigilance. The person on the porch watches. The neighbor calls if a child looks tired. The moms swap numbers and keep an eye on who picks up who from practice. The idea that a child could simply vanish from under that circle is almost inconceivable. It sits like a misconception, comfortable until reality reshapes it. Before that summer night, the Nick's life followed the pattern most families know. Colleen worked to keep the household running, balancing grocery lists and school projects and the small dramas only a family knows. She knew the schedule of who needed what when, the exact time her son's game started, the coach's name, the regulars at the concession stand. In the evenings, she liked to sit with a cup of tea and the low hum of the television, the house settling into the kind of quiet that feels like safety. Morgan fit into that pattern in the way only a child does, effortless, unquestioning, busy with the supplies of play. She loved her brother enough to sit through baseball games, even the ones that lengthened into dull innings. She made friends easily and trusted adults by instinct. She learned to cross the yard to the neighbor's house for a ball, to call out when she wanted a sandwich, to respond when her mother's voice carried over the wooden steps. When a child is raised in a town where the sirens are rare and neighbors are many, the very texture of care is communal. A parent sometimes trusts a coach as an extension of supervision, a teenager as a temporary guardian, a nearby car as a benign presence. That trust, unexamined and widespread, creates a life where children run and parents breathe easy. It is a kind of faith in the social fabric that binds people together. But that fabric is not invulnerable. Tiny oversights, seconds of diverted attention, and the presence of a stranger at the edge of the field can shift everything. It takes only the smallest misalignment for an ordinary evening to become something else entirely. For the Knicks, the misalignment was a few footsteps behind the bleachers, a short trip to empty sand from a shoe. It was seconds that are now dense with interpretation. In Alma, in the days after the disappearance, people tried on memories like clothing, testing for fit, searching for seams. They asked themselves what they would have seen if they had been looking a little harder. The community tried to measure where responsibility began and ended, and the question of what could have been done differently hung in neighborhood kitchens and in the pews after Sunday service. Guilt and helplessness sat side by side. Some whispered that safety had been naive. Others insisted on the better world that had existed before, refusing to erase it from memory. Colleen's days after the night became organized around tasks that refused to yield answers. She met with officers, handed out photographs, spoke with reporters, and learned to translate grief into action. She slept poorly and measured time in phone calls. She learned the mechanics of an investigation while learning to carry an absence like a second garment. Her grief was private, but also procedural. There were lists of leads to follow, envelopes of flyers to print, people to call and reassure. Grief and investigation braided into one relentless routine. The local police, who had served the town for years and were more accustomed to traffic disputes than abduction cases, found themselves thrust into the complex mechanics of a missing child investigation. Detectives from the state and federal levels arrived, carrying techniques and equipment the town had rarely required. Search patterns were organized, evidence collected with a meticulous, clinical process that felt both comforting and cold beside the warmth of a mother's plate. Technology then was not what it is now. Surveillance cameras were sparse. Plate readers and ubiquitous cell phone footage did not blanket the highways. Investigators relied on canvassing, eyewitness recollection, tire tracks, and the meticulous sifting of the scene. Those early methods yielded fragments that needed to be bound into a narrative: the truck at the back of the field, the witness's partial descriptions, a timeline that would be argued over and refined. Each piece had to be fitted with care and caution to avoid the distortions of rushed certainty. The community responded in the way small towns often do, by showing up. Volunteers queued with flashlights and thermoses, following officers into woods and drainage ditches, turning over rocks and shouting names until their throats were raw. Local businesses printed flyers without being asked. Churches held prayer vigils. The town's youth, who only nights before had chased balls and swatted at mosquitoes, stood on the sidelines with faces older than their years. This collective movement was both solace and sorrow. Solace because it asserted that Morden was not forgotten, sorrow because the act of searching made the loss both visible and communal. The media arrived as well, shifting the event from a local tragedy to a public story. Broadcasters spoke of the vanished girl with a cadence that blurred personal agony into a headline. National attention brought resources and noise. For the family, cameras at the door were a mixture of support and intrusion. Interviews meant Morgan's image circulated across states and into strangers' living rooms, bringing tips and pleas and sometimes cruel misinformation. Publicity extended the reach of the search, but it also invited speculation. Amid the swirl of activity, the Nick family's private life contracted around memory and ritual. Holidays became rituals of remembrance. The toys in Morgan's room remained untouched, a small shrine. Family photographs showed a child who could not now be present for the years those pictures promised. Each birthday marked another year of the absence that refused to be explained. Family decisions, once ordinary, now bore the weight of the disappearance. Every school event, every holiday, every quiet morning held the ghost of what might have been.
The story of Morgan's early life and the town she inhabited is more than a prelude. It is the proof of normalcy against which the disruption is painfully visible. Understanding who she was and the kind of world she came from explains why the loss resonated so deeply. It explains why the mother's voice calling across a ball field could become the sound that altered law enforcement practice, inspired advocacy, and reshaped a community's idea of safety. The aftermath taught people about the fragility of assumed protection and the power of organized love. It taught them that a single family's pain could light a national conversation and that grief could be translated into institutions intended to prevent similar heartbreak. In those first days and in the years that followed, the town of Alma learned to balance mourning with action, private sorrow with public duty. And at the center of those lessons was a small child who liked stones and butterflies and the hush of the baseball field at dusk. June 9th, 1995, began with the warmth of an ordinary Arkansas morning. The day moved in that slow, forgiving way that small towns offer, the heat rising and falling with the hum of cicadas. By afternoon, the air shimmered with the promise of another evening game at the Alma Little League field. Children dragged bats and gloves across the gravel parking lot. Parents unpacked folding chairs and coolers from the trunks of sedans. The smell of grilled hamburgers drifted from the concession stand, mingling with the faint sweetness of honeysuckle from the edge of the woods. Morgan was excited for the game. Her brother was playing, and she loved watching him run the bases. She wore denim shorts, a green t-shirt, and pink sneakers that blinked with small lights when she walked. Her brown hair, tied neatly into a ponytail, brushed her shoulders. She held a small cup of popcorn in one hand and leaned against her mother's chair, swaying slightly to the rhythm of the crowd's chatter. Around her, the field pulsed with energy. The slap of a glove, the rhythmic clapping from the bleachers, the metallic pop of soda cans opening. Colleen watched her daughter with the gentle vigilance of a parent who believes in safety. There was nothing that looked out of place that night, no sense of threat. The field was full of people she knew. Coaches shouted instructions. Younger siblings built castles out of dirt near the bases. Morgan's laughter floated above the noise as she played with her two friends, Ty and Jessica. They darted in and out of the crowd, playing a game of pretend that only 6-year-olds could invent. They twirled in circles until they fell down dizzy, lay in the grass, and stared up at the fading pink of the sky. Sometime during the second inning, the girls asked if they could chase fireflies behind the bleachers. Colleen hesitated for a moment, but then nodded. The area was only a few yards away, visible from the stands. The girls ran off, their sneakers leaving faint tracks in the soft dirt. They collected handfuls of the small glowing insects, cupping them carefully before letting them fly. The air was thick with the kind of joy that feels eternal. Morgan eventually felt something sharp in her shoe. She stopped, sat on the curb, and shook it out. She told her friends she would go dump the sand by her mother's car and come back. They nodded, too distracted to follow. It was an unremarkable decision, one of those choices that should have led nowhere at all. She walked off, her small silhouette outlined by the field's bright lights. Not far from the bleachers, a pickup truck sat idling. The paint was faded, either red or brown, depending on who remembered. A white camper shell covered the bed. The driver's window was rolled halfway down. Inside sat a man, his face mostly shadowed. Witnesses would later recall a middle-aged man, lean, with dark hair and perhaps a mustache. He was watching the field, motionless. People noticed him only briefly, the way one notices any stranger parked near a game. The last confirmed sighting of Morgan places her near that truck, at the edge of the parking lot, under the glow of the field lights. She was likely heading back towards the bleachers, the sand gone from her shoes, her popcorn finished, ready to rejoin her friends. Somewhere in those next moments, she vanished. The first hint that something was wrong came softly. Jessica looked around, searching for Morgan's face. She assumed Morgan had gone back to her mother. When the inning ended, the girls returned to their seats near the bleachers. Colleen smiled at them and asked, "Where's Morgan?" They looked puzzled. "She went to dump sand from her shoes," one replied. Colleen stood up, scanning the field. She expected to see her daughter walking back from the cars, maybe distracted by something. She saw only the shimmer of heat rising from the gravel. Her voice lifted above the hum of the crowd. "Morgan!" she called, once, then again louder. Parents nearby looked up. Players on the field glanced toward the bleachers. The sound of the game receded. Within minutes, the atmosphere shifted. The ordinary sounds of laughter and play fell away, replaced by something taut and uneasy.
People began searching the concession stand, the restrooms, the small wooded area at the back of the field. Coaches left their dugouts. Flashlights appeared. Parents pulled their children close. The pickup truck that had been parked near the field was gone. Someone thought they remembered it pulling away not long before. Police were called. The first officers arrived quickly, setting up a perimeter around the park. They asked for details, what she was wearing, when she was last seen, which direction she might have gone. Volunteers fanned out across the field with flashlights, their beams cutting through the dark as they called her name. The sound of crickets mixed with the echo of voices and the static of police radios. As the search expanded, details trickled in. Several witnesses remembered seeing a man watching the kids play near the bleachers. One recalled seeing Morgan standing near that man, though at the time it had seemed unremarkable. Another thought they saw a truck driving slowly out of the parking lot, its headlights off, until it reached the highway. But the details were inconsistent. The color of the truck, the direction it turned, the time it left. The field became a sea of motion. Officers combed through the grass, checked behind bleachers, looked in culverts and ditches. Helicopters circled overhead, their spotlights sweeping across the tree line. The scent of fuel and sweat and dust hung in the air. Every minute that passed without a discovery felt longer than the one before. Colleen stood near the dugout, surrounded by neighbors. Her face was pale, her hands trembling. She called her daughter's name until her voice cracked. She tried to convince herself that Morgan was hiding, that she had wandered off and would appear any second. The police reassured her as best they could, but their expressions gave away the growing dread. By midnight, the baseball field had turned into a command post. Officers marked a map of the area with red circles, noting each sighting, each sound, each faint lead. A photograph of Morgan, smiling with a gap-toothed grin, was taped to the inside of a patrol car window. Volunteers moved in groups through the surrounding woods. The soft murmur of voices became a rhythm. Search, call, listen, move. The first night ended without answers. The next morning, the field was quiet again, the stands empty. The chalk lines still traced the base paths, the scoreboard still showed the final inning score, but the sound that once filled the air was gone. The echo of that silence carried through every street in Alma. The timeline of those moments would be reconstructed over and over again by investigators. The friends who played with her, the adults who saw her, the strangers who might have passed through, all their stories collected and compared, building a picture of a moment so brief that it seemed impossible that it could contain so much devastation. That night became the point around which the rest of the town's history would turn. A field where laughter had filled the air became the site of loss. For Alma, the disappearance of Morgan Nick was not just a crime, it was a rupture in the trust that defined them. And for her mother, it was the beginning of a search that would never end.
The first hours after Morgan's disappearance unfolded in a blur of motion and disbelief. What began as a Little League game turned into an emergency command post under the glare of the same lights that had illuminated the children's laughter only hours earlier. Officers arrived from nearby towns, their radios crackling with clipped instructions. The bleachers emptied as parents stayed behind to help, unwilling to leave while a child remained missing. Colleen Nick moved through the field like someone untethered from time. She clutched the photo of her daughter, the one taken at her 6th birthday party, Morgan's hair pulled into pigtails and her smile broad. She handed it to an officer, repeating every detail she could remember. The color of Morgan's shirt, the brand of her shoes, the direction she was walking, the moment she was last seen. Her voice quivered, but never broke. She could not afford the break. Search teams spread out from the field into the surrounding neighborhoods. They walked shoulder to shoulder through thick grass and empty lots, through ditches and tree lines. The low whir of a helicopter joined them, sweeping its light across the dark stretch of Alma. Officers on the ground radioed positions, calling out coordinates and checking off grid squares on hand-drawn maps. The noise of the rotor blended with the chorus of names being shouted into the dark. Inside the small police station, phone lines were overwhelmed. Residents called in anything that seemed out of place: a truck parked near a field, a man walking along the road, a sound they couldn't explain. Detectives logged each report, sorting the credible from the impossible. Within hours, the description of the suspect's vehicle had spread through Arkansas and neighboring states: a red pickup, possibly with a white camper shell, occupied by a man in his 30s or 40s. By morning, state troopers had joined the search. The scent of coffee and sweat hung in the air as law enforcement officers mapped routes, checked rivers, and canvassed rest stops. The nearby interstate was patrolled heavily. Every driver of a similar truck was questioned. Mechanics were asked if they had recently worked on a vehicle that fit the description. Volunteers volunteered to hand out flyers, some printed on copy paper at local churches, each bearing the same smiling photograph. The media arrived before the second sunset. Satellite trucks parked beside the baseball field. Reporters stood before cameras describing the search in measured voices, their words filling living rooms across the state. Viewers saw Colleen standing near the chain-link fence, her hands clasped together, her eyes hollow but fierce. "Please," she said into the microphones, "if you know where Morgan is, bring her home." Her plea carried through television speakers and across radios, the tremor of her voice cutting through static. The case became a statewide priority. FBI agents were called in to assist, bringing additional resources and expertise. They coordinated with local officers, interviewing witnesses again and again. One by one, those who had been at the field described what they saw: a little girl with light brown hair, a man standing by a pickup truck, headlights fading into the distance. Each statement was entered into reports, pinned on boards, connected by string and notation. Forensic teams examined the area behind the bleachers and the gravel of the parking lot. Tire impressions were photographed and compared. Soil samples were taken. Footprints, too small to belong to an adult, were found in the dust near where the truck had been parked. But the marks overlapped and told no clear story. Investigators worked with care and frustration, every small detail both vital and inconclusive. The days stretched into a rhythm of searching and waiting. Officers checked ponds and drainage culverts. They knocked on doors and questioned anyone who might have been driving through Alma that night. Rumors spread through the town like wildfire. People whispered theories, pointed fingers, and sometimes turned suspicion toward their own neighbors. Each false lead took time. Each dead end consumed hope. Colleen refused to rest. She walked with volunteers along the tree line, her shoes caked with mud. She held vigils at the ball field, candles flickering in rows beneath the bleachers. She spoke to the media whenever they asked, her face calm, but her eyes carrying a quiet storm. In private, she cried into her hands, unable to understand how her daughter could vanish in a place surrounded by people. The police chief, a man who had spent decades in Alma without a major crime, called the disappearance the hardest case of his career. He said it was like she just disappeared into thin air. He met with Colleen daily, updating her on the investigation's progress, though each meeting brought the same conclusion: no significant leads. Searches expanded beyond Alma. Flyers appeared on gas station doors in neighboring towns, on bulletin boards at grocery stores, in the windows of diners. Truckers carried her photo along their routes. Families across Arkansas prayed for a girl they'd never met. The story made national news, and for a brief moment it felt as though the entire country was searching. As days turned into weeks, fatigue began to show. Volunteers had to return to their jobs. The media trucks left one by one, chasing the next story. The police scaled down their nightly searches, focusing instead on investigation. Alma returned to a quieter version of itself, but nothing about the town felt familiar anymore. Parents gripped their children's hands tighter. Strangers became subjects of wary glances. Despite the exhaustion, the investigation pressed on. Tips arrived by phone and mail: a sighting at a truck stop, a girl who resembled Morgan in a restaurant 2 counties away, a man in a red truck seen near another park. Each lead sent detectives driving across the state. Each one dissolved into nothing. Every return trip carried more silence than before. The baseball field remained sealed with yellow tape for weeks. Rain washed over the dirt paths where hundreds of footsteps had tread during the search. When the tape finally came down, the field looked the same, but it felt changed. Parents hesitated to let their children out of sight. Coaches watched every corner of the lot before calling practice. At the center of it all stood Colleen, who refused to surrender to despair. She attended every press conference, every community meeting, every search. She kept a notebook filled with dates, names, and details, determined to hold on to facts even as they blurred together. Hope became her discipline. Investigators knew the odds. They knew that as hours passed without a sign, the chances of finding Morgan safe diminished. But they also knew that in cases like this, miracles sometimes surfaced years later. They refused to close the case, refused to stop asking questions. In homes across Alma, porch lights stayed on through the night. The soft glow became a quiet symbol, a signal for Morgan to find her way home, and a reminder to those who searched that they were not alone. What began as a night of community and light had become a long stretch of darkness. Yet even in that darkness, something else began to grow. A shared determination that what happened to Morgan Nick would not fade into silence. The town that once measured its evenings in innings now measured them in days since a child went missing. The Little League field remained, the scoreboard repaired, the grass trimmed. But to those who had been there that night, every sound of laughter, every echo of a baseball striking a glove carried a different kind of weight. It carried memory and grief and the unspoken promise that the search for Morgan would never truly end.
Time began to stretch in ways that ordinary calendars could not measure. Days moved slower, nights grew longer, and the simple act of waking up each morning became an exercise in endurance. The disappearance of Morgan Nick had already changed the landscape of Alma, but as weeks turned into months and months into years, it reshaped the lives of everyone who had ever stood on that field. Colleen Nick refused to let her daughter fade into a statistic. Every morning she woke before dawn, sat at the kitchen table, and reviewed the notes she had written from the day before. Names of detectives, times of phone calls, leads that had come and gone. The notebook grew thick with details, but none of them brought her closer to the truth. Still, she believed that the answer was out there somewhere, waiting to be found if she just kept searching. The police continued to work the case, revisiting interviews, chasing every rumor no matter how faint. Leads came from across the country. Someone claimed to have seen a girl who looked like Morgan at a gas station in Oklahoma. Another reported seeing her in a shopping mall in Missouri. Each time, investigators set out immediately, the possibility of a breakthrough pushing them forward. Each time, they returned empty-handed. The hope that lifted everyone in those first few hours would surge again, only to settle back into silence. For the Nick family, the silence became its own presence. It filled their house, their conversations, their memories. Morgan's room remained as it had been that night, her toys neatly lined up, her favorite stuffed bear resting on the pillow, a small nightlight still plugged into the wall. Colleen refused to change anything. She said that when Morgan came home, she wanted her room to be exactly as she remembered it. The community of Alma tried to return to normal, but nothing about normal felt right anymore. Parents walked their children to school instead of letting them ride their bikes. Windows stayed lit through the night. The Little League games resumed, but the bleachers carried a new heaviness. Before each season began, coaches gathered the players and reminded them to stay together, to tell an adult where they were going. The simple act of playing ball had been transformed into a ritual of vigilance. Each year, on the anniversary of Morgan's disappearance, the town gathered at the field for a candlelight vigil. Hundreds of people stood under the same lights that had illuminated her last moments. They prayed, they sang, and they said her name aloud, promising not to forget. Colleen stood at the center, holding a candle that flickered in the wind,
her face illuminated by the soft glow of hundreds more. It was both an act of mourning and defiance, a promise to keep believing in a world where answers still existed. The investigation did not stop. Detectives from the Arkansas State Police and the FBI continued to monitor the case. They developed new technologies and forensic methods, re-examining old evidence with tools that hadn't existed in 1995. Computer databases connected investigators across states, allowing them to compare tire tracks, fingerprints, and vehicle registrations. But technology could only go so far when faced with the stubborn absence of physical evidence. Through the years, several suspects emerged. One man was questioned after being linked to other child abductions in the region, but no evidence tied him directly to Morgan's case. Another lead surfaced when a witness came forward with new information about a red truck seen in a nearby town. The vehicle was found, examined, and ruled out. Each false lead cut deeper. Each dead end, another reminder of how easily hope could become heartbreak. Despite the failures, Colleen never retreated. She began working closely with other parents whose children had disappeared, building a network of families united by tragedy and determination. They shared stories, compared notes, and offered each other the kind of understanding only those who had lived through the same nightmare could provide. Together, they learned how to keep the world's attention on their missing children, how to push past bureaucracy, and how to turn grief into advocacy. Media outlets continued to revisit the story every few years, bringing Morgan's name back into the public eye. Each new broadcast brought an influx of tips, and each time Colleen waited by the phone, willing it to ring with the one call that would end the search. She appeared on talk shows, stood in front of cameras, and told the story again and again. Her voice steady, but carrying the weight of 20 sleepless years. She would say, "If you know something, no matter how small, please come forward." Morgan's siblings grew up in the shadow of her absence. They learned early the vocabulary of loss, the weight of uncertainty. They attended school events, birthdays, and holidays, always aware that someone was missing. Every family photo carried a space where Morgan should have been. Her younger sister once said that she felt she had grown up with a ghost, not one that haunted the house, but one that hovered gently around them, a reminder of love that had never disappeared. The years changed everything except the search. Investigators retired, new ones took their place, files were digitized, and evidence was re-examined. Alma evolved too. The town grew, new neighborhoods were built, and children who had once stood at the vigils became adults raising their own families. But everyone still remembered that summer night, and every new parent understood the caution born from it. In 2010, a fresh tip reignited the investigation. A witness claimed to have seen a vehicle similar to the suspect's near the ball field that night and identified a possible driver. The police conducted new searches, excavated rural land, and examined properties. The news cameras returned, hopeful that closure might finally be near. Nothing was found. The disappointment was familiar by then, a dull ache rather than a sharp wound, but it hurt just the same. Colleen's resolve never wavered. Over time, she became more than a mother searching for a child. She became a symbol of perseverance. She spoke at schools and community events, teaching children about safety and parents about awareness. She joined panels on missing person cases and worked to strengthen cooperation between law enforcement and families. Her message was simple: no one is powerless when it comes to protecting children. Through her efforts, Morgan's case remained active long after many would have faded into archives. She learned to live with the uncertainty, but refused to accept it as final. Her home became a command center for hope, filled with boxes of newspaper clippings, case files, and photographs. Every piece of information, no matter how small, had a place. In moments of quiet, Colleen would sit on her porch and watch the Arkansas sky darken to violet. She often imagined Morgan somewhere beneath that same sky, grown now, perhaps remembering her family, perhaps waiting to be found. It was an image that sustained her through the exhaustion, the interviews, and the years of not knowing. For Alma, the disappearance had become more than a case.
It had become a part of the town's collective memory. Every child who grew up there knew Morgan's story. Every parent knew the name by heart. The field where she vanished was no longer just a baseball diamond. It was a place of remembrance, a symbol of how fragile and precious a moment can be. Even as new generations filled the stands, the echoes of that night remained. The cheers of children playing ball carried a shadow of the past, a quiet reminder that safety is never something to be taken for granted. And in every corner of the town, from the classrooms to the church steps, people carried the same unspoken promise. Morgan would not be forgotten. In the long years after that summer night, time carved its distance, but it never erased her. The story endured not because of tragedy alone, but because of the strength that followed. Out of that darkness grew something larger. A mother's determination, a town's vigilance, and a community's understanding that love, even when it cannot find its way home, can still light the path for others.
From the emptiness of unanswered questions, something new began to take shape. Out of the silence and the sorrow, Colleen Nick decided that her daughter's story could not end with loss. She understood that grief had the power to destroy or to build, and she chose to build. What began as one mother's search became a mission that would reach far beyond Alma, Arkansas. Colleen spent months after Morgan's disappearance learning everything she could about missing children. She met with investigators, counselors, and other families who had lived the same nightmare. She studied how cases were handled, where systems failed, and what could have been done differently. Every new fact fed her resolve. She realized that while she might not have control over what had happened to her daughter, she could change what happened next, for other families, for other children, for other mothers. In the years that followed, Colleen became a voice that refused to fade. Her determination evolved into the Morgan Nick Foundation, a nonprofit organization created to prevent child abductions, support families of the missing, and educate communities about safety. From a small office in Alma, she and a handful of volunteers built something powerful. The walls were lined with photographs of missing children, each one representing a family still waiting for answers. Morgan's photo hung at the center, smiling down from a frame that served as both memory and promise. The foundation began its work quietly, but its reach grew quickly. Colleen traveled across the state, speaking at schools, churches, and community centers. She taught children about staying safe in public spaces, about trusting their instincts, about how to seek help if they ever felt uncomfortable. She encouraged parents to talk openly with their kids, not to terrify them, but to arm them with awareness. The message was never fear. It was empowerment. In partnership with the Arkansas State Police and the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, the Morgan Nick Foundation helped build better communication between families and law enforcement. When a child went missing, the foundation stepped in to support the family, offering guidance on how to work with investigators, how to speak to the media, and how to keep hope alive during the agonizing wait for answers. For many parents lost in confusion and fear, it was the first time they felt they were not alone. One of the foundation's most significant contributions came in its work with the Amber Alert system. At the time of Morgan's disappearance, no rapid alert existed to inform the public when a child was abducted. Colleen fought to change that. She pushed for laws and policies that would ensure the immediate, statewide dissemination of critical information. The first Amber Alerts in Arkansas carried the name of the Morgan Nick Foundation, a reminder that the system was born out of one mother's promise. As the foundation grew, so did its programs. Play It Safe workshops became staples in elementary schools, teaching children simple, practical steps to stay safe, how to recognize suspicious situations, how to use a family code word, how to trust their inner voice. At the same time, Colleen worked to train law enforcement officers and community leaders, ensuring that when a child went missing, every response was immediate, coordinated, and compassionate.
Through media campaigns, public service announcements, and educational materials, Morgan's name reached millions. Her story, once confined to Alma, became a symbol of hope and action across the country. Families who had never met the Nicks found comfort in the organization's work. They saw that, even in the darkest circumstances, love could be transformed into something that saved others. Colleen often spoke about how the foundation kept her connected to her daughter. In interviews, she described Morgan as her guiding light, the reason she woke each day and continued to fight. She said, "This isn't just about my child. It's about every child. Every single one deserves to come home." Over time, the foundation became a refuge for families navigating their worst days. When a child disappeared, Colleen and her team made sure parents knew what to do: how to communicate with police, how to manage volunteers, how to keep the public engaged. They helped organize searches, printed flyers, and provided counseling. More than anything, they listened. In those quiet conversations, parents found the understanding that only another parent could provide. In the years following its founding, the Morgan Nick Foundation influenced national policy and local practice alike. Colleen worked with state legislators to improve missing child response protocols. She spoke before committees about the emotional toll of abduction cases, urging officials to treat them not as statistics, but as stories with living, breathing families attached. Her advocacy changed laws, improved training, and gave thousands of parents tools that might one day save their children's lives. The foundation's presence was felt across Arkansas. Billboards carried Morgan's face and hotline numbers. Highway signs reminded drivers to watch for missing children. In Alma, the baseball field where Morgan vanished became a site of remembrance and awareness. Each summer, children gathered for games held in her honor. The air was filled once again with the sounds of laughter, the crack of bats, and the soft rustle of the wind through the bleachers. But beneath it all was a quiet, steady message: vigilance and love could coexist. The foundation also reached beyond prevention and advocacy. It offered healing. Colleen understood that grief needed community, and she built one for those who had nowhere else to turn. Families of the missing wrote letters, called the hotline, and found comfort in knowing that someone was walking the same road beside them. The organization began hosting annual remembrance ceremonies, where candles were lit for every child still missing, each flame representing both loss and hope. Morgan's legacy continued to grow. The foundation became a model for similar organizations around the nation. Colleen's voice became one of authority and empathy in discussions of child safety. She trained law enforcement agencies on how to work compassionately with families. She developed partnerships with social workers, counselors, and educators. Her reach extended to thousands of people who might otherwise have never heard Morgan's name, but who carried her story forward in the work they did every day. Through every success, Colleen remained grounded in the same belief that had sustained her from the beginning, that her daughter's disappearance had to mean something beyond pain. She never allowed despair to define her. Her resolve turned tragedy into transformation, turning the worst moment of her life into a lifeline for countless others. The Morgan Nick Foundation became more than an organization. It became a living monument. Its office walls were filled with photographs of smiling children, many of them safely returned home because of the awareness campaigns it inspired. The staff celebrated every recovered child as if it were their own, and when cases ended in sorrow, they carried that grief together, united by purpose. In Alma, the impact of the foundation was visible, not only in its programs, but in the way the town itself changed. Parents watched over one another's children. Teachers spoke openly about safety in classrooms. Coaches and volunteers were trained to identify potential threats. The simple act of community awareness had become a shared culture, a kind of protective circle built from the ashes of one family's loss. Over the years,
Colleen's work earned national recognition, but she never allowed accolades to distract her from the mission. Whenever she was asked how she endured decades without answers, she returned to the same words: "Because I promised Morgan I would never stop." That promise lived in every pamphlet, every school visit, every late-night phone call to a panicked parent. It lived in every child who came home safe because someone had learned from Morgan's story. And so, what began on a small baseball field in Alma transformed into a nationwide force for good. Out of the silence of one summer night came a movement built on compassion, resilience, and love. The Morgan Nick Foundation stood as proof that even in the aftermath of horror, hope could not only survive, it could thrive. It became more than an effort to find one missing child. It became a testament to what happens when a mother refuses to give up, when a community chooses action over despair, and when tragedy is met not with surrender, but with purpose. And though Morgan herself remained missing, her presence continued to shape the world around her, protecting children, guiding families, and reminding everyone who heard her story that love is the most enduring form of justice.
Years have passed, and still, the name Morgan Nick carries a gravity that settles quietly over Alma, Arkansas. Her story endures in the rustle of leaves that move through the baseball field at dusk, in the porch lights that burn through the night, and in the voices of children who grow up knowing that once, on a summer evening not so long ago, a little girl disappeared, and the world changed because of it. The case remains open. Law enforcement continues to follow every lead, no matter how small. Files once kept in manila folders now sit digitized, accessible with a few keystrokes, each note and report representing a piece of the puzzle still missing. Over the years, new tips have surfaced: letters, phone calls, eyewitness claims, and each one has been chased with the same urgency as the first, but none have brought Morgan home. Her mother has learned to live inside a space where hope and heartbreak coexist. Colleen Nick wakes every morning with the same thought that has guided her for decades: today could be the day. That hope is not naive. It is disciplined, sharpened by years of waiting. She knows that even the smallest detail could one day shift everything. It is this belief that keeps her moving forward. In interviews, she still speaks in the present tense when she talks about her daughter. Morgan is funny. She loves animals and she's brave. She uses those words because to her, Morgan is not gone. She is only away, living in a world of unfinished sentences and unanswered questions. She continues to advocate, to speak, to teach, to lead. Her work is her devotion. The town of Alma has grown since that summer night. New neighborhoods have risen, stores have opened and closed, generations have passed through the schools. Yet the memory of that evening remains carved into its collective conscience. There are families here who were not even born when Morgan vanished, but they know her name. They see it on the banners at the annual awareness walk, on the brochures in the library, on the sign near the baseball field that reads, "In honor of Morgan Nick, always remembered, never forgotten." The field itself has been renovated. Fresh paint on the bleachers, new lights that shine brighter than before. The sound of children laughing once again fills the space, though beneath that laughter lies a quiet reverence. Before every season begins, the coaches remind parents to stay close, to be vigilant, to remember why the rules exist. The story of Morgan Nick has become a lesson passed from one generation to the next, a story that teaches not only about tragedy, but about resilience and care. Each year, on June 9th, people gather at the field for a vigil. Candles line the bases, casting circles of light onto the grass. Families stand together, holding photographs of their own children, reflecting on the fragility of life. Colleen speaks softly to the crowd, her voice carrying across the field. "We will never stop searching," she tells them. "Until we know where Morgan is, we keep going." Around her, the glow of candlelight flickers against faces marked by time and memory. The vigils have become more than remembrance. They are a renewal of purpose. People who attend once as neighbors return as volunteers, advocates, donors, mentors. The ripples of one story have reached far beyond Arkansas. Across the country, children are safer because of the laws and programs that bear Morgan's name. Amber alerts flash on highway signs. News stations break into broadcasts with urgent messages. And families act quickly because they know how much every minute matters. Each of these moments is part of Morgan's legacy, a living testament to what her absence created. Still, for those closest to her, the mystery lingers like a wound that never fully closes. Investigators who worked the original case have retired, yet many still carry her memory with them. Some have described it as the case that changed the way they see their own families, the one that made them hug their children tighter before bed. Others still keep her photo pinned inside old case files, unwilling to move it to storage. For Colleen, there are days of strength and days of exhaustion. Some morning she drives past the field and imagines Morgan running across the grass, her laughter ringing through the air as if time had folded in on itself and brought her back. At night, when the world grows quiet, she sometimes sits outside and talks to her daughter as though she was still near. She tells her about the families the foundation has helped, about the children who came home, about the lives that have been saved because of her. She tells her that the world remembers her name, that her story matters. What began as a single tragedy has become a movement defined by endurance. The Morgan Nick Foundation continues to grow, its reach extending into new states, new schools, new communities. It serves as a constant reminder that out of grief can come strength, out of heartbreak can come compassion, and out of one child's disappearance can come a legacy that protects countless others. The people who work there do so with reverence. They know that behind every case filed is a family waiting, hoping, believing. Hope is what defines this story now. It is no longer the brittle, desperate hope of the first nights of searching. It is something steadier, forged through time, a hope that carries both pain and grace, that acknowledges loss but refuses to surrender to it. Hope is what keeps the candles burning at the vigils. It is what fills Colleen's voice when she says her daughter's name. It is what brings strangers together year after year to stand in solidarity against the silence that once consumed this town. The truth of what happened to Morgan Nick remains hidden, suspended somewhere between memory and mystery. But her presence, her influence, her spirit has never been lost. It lives in every child who walks safely home from a park, in every family reunited because someone cared enough to act, and in every mother who refuses to let fear silence her love. In the quiet of the evening, as the lights of Alma's baseball field blink out one by one, the sounds of the night return, the chirping of crickets, the distant hum of traffic, the soft breeze moving through the grass. And if you stand there long enough, you might just hear it, the echo of laughter carried on the wind, a voice calling across the field, a mother's answer carried back on hope. Morgan Nick remains a mystery, but she is not lost in the truest sense. Her name is written in the work of those who remember her, and the protection of children who will never know how much they owe to her story, and then the resilience of a mother who turned grief into grace. Because some disappearances change more than one life, they change the world. Share this story, because awareness brings hope,
and hope is how justice begins.